Okay. Okay, we are live. So, welcome to a somewhat unorthodox and admittedly awkward new GPQB initiative. My name is Ryan Bilger, and this is not as comfortable as it looks. But anyhow, welcome to our attempt at an end of the season live stream reveal for the GPQB poll. It's been an exciting 2019-2020 in Quizbowl in the state, even if we couldn't quite finish it off. So we're going to run down the results of the poll, which are hidden on my whiteboard behind these lovely stacks of books. We're going to run down and give some thoughts on each team. So, but it's not just me talking. We've got our two additional panelists here tonight, Ben Herman and Alex Sankaran. So if you guys would both like to say a word to the people.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning into this live stream attempt. There were some technical difficulties getting started, but we're happy to have you, and I'm excited to go through this poll, which is in some ways the weirdest poll we've ever done because of the nature of this season being cut short, but I think it also shows some interesting things about how our panel votes on these teams and how they compare to each other in this kind of weird vacuum where they might not have played each other as much.
Right, what Ben said, I think this is not quite as good as HSNCT, but it'll have to do, and hopefully this gives you your Quizbowl content fix for the end of the school year.
Yes, indeed. So we're going to start with the teams that just missed out on the top 10, those that were quote unquote also receiving votes. So the ranking numbers that you see next to them are kind of unofficial. The numbers in parentheses on the right of the team name is the number of poll votes they received weighted by what number they were at. So we're going to remove the first couple of books from the stack. My awkward Vanna White attempt to show the two teams that ranked tied for 12th, Winchester Thurston and Moravian, each getting 1 point each. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben to go first. I know we didn't necessarily see both of these teams, so we'll give what we can.
Yeah, so Winchester Thurston and Moravian are two teams that have been around quite a while. Both have performed quite well in the past. Thurston was the state champion now 3 years ago in 2017. I think both these teams showed a lot of potential over the course of the year, even though they really didn't quite put it together. Unfortunately for Thurston, their best performances were actually when they didn't have their whole team together. They only had the chance to do that once, again, because the season got cut short at Carnegie Quiz in February, and they didn't do all that well there, but they had some nice performances in the fall, and I think they kept some of the momentum from last year going in that respect because they had a pretty good finish at SSNCT last year. As for Moravian, I didn't get the chance to read for them this year. They're one of the few teams I missed. But I think that they showed that they were able to handle difficult questions and score pretty well. They had very good bonus conversion for a team of their caliber and their pedigree. I think the reason they didn't get to the top 10 is simply because they just didn't have the big wins. They were a team that was able to hang with a lot of the top teams in Eastern Pennsylvania this year, but they weren't able to beat them. So that's kind of why I think they placed where they did.
Yeah, I think for Thurston, obviously I didn't see Winchester Thurston, me being based in the Southeast, but overall they're always one of the best teams in the Pittsburgh area. And I think just the thing that held them back from actually placing in the top 10 was just a little bit of inconsistency. Again, Ben mentioned the lack of full rosters, which definitely hurts. And maybe they might have, turned things around a little bit more, but they were just a little bit too inconsistent over some of the other teams that would have otherwise gotten them into the top 10. But even with that, they were still very close. As for Moravian, one of the things that impressed me was their ASET points per bonus was around like the 23 mark, even above 23, which is quite solid and at the level of some of the teams that are ranked ahead of them in this poll. Now, the one thing is, as the difficulty level goes up, so IS sets, that level dropped pretty considerably, but on like regs minus difficulty, they did quite well. I saw them at Philly Fall. They finished 6th there, which was a pretty stacked field, had pretty much all the best teams. And Southeastern Pennsylvania, and they overall were one of the best teams from the Northeast, probably the best team from the Northeast, and it's unfortunate we didn't get to see more of them.
I don't really have anything more to add. I did not get to see Moravian play, and I only saw Thurston at that Carnegie Quiz tournament where it seemed like they were adapting a little bit to having their full lineup together. Definitely talent there, but they just didn't quite have the time to put it together. So now we go to the other team receiving votes. I don't know if how well the green marker is coming through there, but Alderdice received 4 votes to finish at 11th place, another Western Pennsylvania team.
Yeah, I thought Alderdice was solid this year. They finished 3rd place in the state the last 2 seasons before this one, and had some very good moments during that period. Tied 12th at HSNCT a couple years back. And this year was a bit of a revolution for them. They kept one player, Truman, from last year, but otherwise it was kind of a new cast of characters. And I did get to read for them a good bit at Sagacity, the tournament at University of Pittsburgh in November. And the sense I got from them is it was a team that was a little unfocused, but when they put themselves to it, they really had a lot of good knowledge, especially in history. They originated as a History Bowl only team, back in the distant past. And I think that still carried through with them. And they showed that they were able to win a lot of games. Other than the state college teams that came down there, they were the best team there that day. Most likely to score powers. Neg rate was pretty high for a team, I must say, but that's okay as long as you're able to get the points. And so, yeah, they were definitely one of the better teams in the western part of the state this year, which was having a down year. This is the weakest we've seen Western PA in a few years, and I think they were able to get a lot of wins and perform well in that environment.
Yeah, going into the year, I think we weren't quite sure what to expect because obviously Truman returning from some of the really deep, really good teams from the last couple of years meant that there was still something to work with, and I think that was shown out by the stats. Again, I not in Western PA, so I didn't actually see them, but from what I saw from their tournament placements, they were definitely at any tournament State College was. They were next best behind them. They beat Thurston a couple of times, which is why you see them receiving more votes. But otherwise, I think there's definitely good. They definitely have a solid base level now. We've seen year in, year out for the last 4 or 5 years. They've continually been one of the best teams in the West, and I don't see why that will change anytime soon.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed actually by the performances I saw from actually both their A and their B teams at Carnegie Quiz. They had some good wins, showed off a lot of knowledge, gave a pretty good George Washington team a good match in the finals. And we'll talk about this a fair bit, but I actually think that Alderdice is one of the teams that was most hurt by not having KSI and HSNCT this year, because I think that could have helped their stock, but so it goes, I guess. Okay, now to the actual top 10. We'll remove some more books from behind me, and we'll get to number 10, which is Oxford. Oxford received 13 points in the poll. So again, I will not be the first one to talk, so if you guys would like to speak a little piece about Oxford.
Oxford, this is a team that I'm really happy to see here. And this is a great example of why Pyramidal Quiz Bowl is a good thing, because this is a team that plays in the Chester County League, which is a demi-pyramidal league now. It used to be all bad Quiz Bowl. Now it's got any QT questions, but they're funky the way that they're chopped up and stuff. And they were a basement dweller for, I'm talking 30 years. In this league. This league goes back to the 80s, and they were never much of anything, Oxford. But now they've been able to have this opportunity, and they've really shined, being able to play teams from other intermediate units, other counties, and they've thrived, and they're getting better at the Chester County League too because of this. So that it's kind of a nice feedback loop, and I'm really happy to see that. This year, they were led by Chris Goodrick, who made the second team for the state. All state teams. And Chris is a really strong player. Still kind of on the newer side of things. He's a little raw, but he really has deep buzzes, and he's a much better MACF format player than an AQT format player. Really thrives on stuff like the fine arts that you find in that distribution. And he was able to score in bunches. Rest of the team was able to chip in here and there, 10, 15 points a game maybe. And they were able to get some big wins. They beat Henderson at Great Valley's tournament in January. They beat Hempfield there. And it's nice. They were the surprise team of this year, I guess I'd say. The expectations that they would be all right after they debuted last year, where they were all right. So they looked like a team that had the potential, and they're a team that realized potential. It was really nice to see them, and I'm really glad they made the top 10.
Yeah, Chris is definitely a very, very good player, and even over, from the Henderson tournament in November to the most recent appearances, so just the span of a couple of months, I think he's improved by leaps and bounds, and that's borne out in their tournament finishes. They went from not making playoffs at Henderson to not only making playoffs at tournaments like Great Valley and Palks, but beating some of these ranked teams. They have wins over Trinity. They have Moravian. Henderson has been at Hempfield. So that to me shows that they belong up in that caliber of teams. I think stats wise, they're a little bit worse. Again, that's mostly the newness and the reliance on one player for scoring, but obviously that doesn't actually matter if you get the results when you win those head-to-head matchups, and that's what they were doing. And it's really positive for them too, since Chris is returning next year, so they're going to be one of those teams that is starting off pretty well at the beginning of next season.
Yeah, I read those games at Great Valley where they beat Henderson and where they beat Hempfield, and I was very impressed. They didn't, I don't want to harp on this too much, but they didn't just beat Henderson, they took them apart. It was like 400 something to like 200 something, and it was not close at all. And I was like, wow, So
Yeah.
again, very impressed by Chris, not only his play, but also how he was able to lead the team as well. And one of those underrated qualities of being a high volume scorer. So good job to Oxford, and we'll see what we can take from them next year.
Yeah.
And moving on to, sorry.
I'll just say, as somebody that's been here since the beginning of GPQB, that Oxford defeat of Henderson is the most shocking single game result we've ever had in this state. I really believe that, to dismantle them like they did.
Yeah, that was fun to come back in the control room with the score sheet and be like, hey, all right, but enough of that. Next is number 9, and as I remove a book by John Feinstein, one of my favorite authors, we get to Hempfield, who finished in 9th place with 16 poll votes. So let's talk about Hempfield.
Let's talk about Hempfield. Last year's state champion, Hempfield, graduated 3 of their 4 seniors, including Player of the Year last year, Will Yeager. Not to be confused with Will Stager, who won Player of the Year this year. We'll talk about him in due time. And they kept going, which is great. That shows good coaching. John Frick is their coach, and he seems like he's one of the rising stars in the coaching field in Pennsylvania. Karsten, who was their starter last year, one of their kind of co-second chairs, because they all scored about 20 points a game behind Will. Karsten stepped into that role now as the team leader beautifully. He was an honorable mention for our all-state teams this year. And when I saw Hempfield play this year, to me, they're a team that is generalists, and I mean that as a compliment. They're not a team that had impressive powers in games I saw them, the same way some of these other teams in the top 10 did. But what they did do well is they worked very well on bonuses together, didn't make unforced errors. They're kind of a low neg team as far as it goes. And they don't have an area of the distribution where they're just sacrificing points. It's not like they're just really weak on science or really weak on literature, as some teams are. They were able to perform across the spectrum. And I think that is why they were able to keep some of last year's momentum going. And I believe they are the only team that we have ranked in the top 10 that is bringing back 90% plus of their scoring in one unit into next year. So first last year, 9th this year, looking primed for another top 5 finish. So very strong team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for Hempfield's case, it's always interesting. Obviously, you hit the peaks that they did last year, finishing number 1 in the state, the T12 HSNCT run. And I think it was crucial that having just that one player, Karsten, return, and he's really stepped up to go from the specialist playing behind a player of the year to then having to shoulder much more of the load is pretty impressive and not something that everybody can do. And the fact that he's been able to do that so well is really a testament to him. Will Yeager's younger brother is on the team and already looks like a pretty promising prospect, already scoring a decent amount. One of the things I noticed with Hempfield is, again, they're punching above their weight, I think, stats wise, especially regular difficulty and up. The points per bonus numbers, some of the power numbers, as Ben alluded to, aren't quite there with some of the other teams, but they still have wins against them. They beat Henderson at Great Valley. They have a win against Penn Manor. They've taken 2 of 3 from FSS. So some of those teams that are above them, even that's mostly based on stats, they still have that capability to beat those teams. So I think going into next year, given that the bulk of scoring is returning, I would be pretty excited for them because I think they can do pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you guys already touched on it, but I was very impressed with how Karsten was able to step up as a team leader. And then you're right, the generalist idea, they're not going to beat themselves on categories. I remember Coach Frick begging some of their players to neg, to say take shots, and if you neg, that's okay. So as we've said, a lot of they're pretty much all coming back, so maybe they'll be getting a better idea of game sense as well as knowledge. Not to say that their game sense is bad, just to say that it's an ever-evolving process. Sure. All right, so we're going to remove the next book. And we get to team number 8, which is Trinity. And as you can kind of see from the poll vote numbers on the right, you're going to see this as we go throughout the list. There's pretty clearly a few different tiers of teams here. So Trinity received a total of 32 points in the poll. I actually did not see them play at all, so I will have nothing to add at the end this time. So I'm just going to turn it over to Ben or Alex, whoever wants to talk about Trinity first.
Yeah. So Trinity, they're the team that really lost the most by losing HSNCT this year in terms of a program. Because I mean, every individual player is affected the same. It really sucks for us all, especially the seniors. But as a program, this is a program that, one of those famous Pennsylvania Quizbowl stories now. They showed up for their first tournament ever on pyramidal questions. They decided to register for the Keystone State Invitational last year, which is on SCT Division II. Not the easiest introduction to Quizbowl for a high school team. And they performed really well, actually. They finished in the top half of the field of that tournament. And they had registered because they had qualified from their local league, which again is one of those, it has an EQT questions, but the format's a little wonky kind of deals, to see if they could hack it at nationals and whether they wanted to register for HSNCT. And they did, and they went and they finished 5-5 at their second ever pyramidal Quizbowl tournament. Like, that never happens, especially these days as the teams in our area have gotten stronger. Like, the barrier to entry gets higher and higher the more established the circuit is. And they were trying to do the same and maybe make the playoffs at HSNCT this year. I think it would have been like a coin flip chance about where they're at. And they're not going to get that chance. And it's really a shame because they deserved that chance. Trinity is a lot like Hempfield in that they're a team that is broader than they are deep, but they have more power potential than Hempfield. I saw them getting a lot of buzzes that were really good, especially in science, which is an area of weakness for some of the teams in the state of Pennsylvania. And I think that helped them in our circuit win a lot of games. Again, the season was limited, so they didn't get to play as much, but every game I saw from them, they looked sharp. Just no mistakes, appropriate powers. And yeah, they can't beat the top 7 teams in the state this year, very often, but they did have some wins against those teams, and that fueled them into some very strong finishes. If I recall, they finished 4th at Henderson's tournament. And I believe they finished the same at Pulse in January. And I was most impressed, particularly with the game I read for them in the playoffs at Henderson, where they were playing Penn Manor. And Penn Manor is a team that it probably has more skill overall than them in terms of what they know and so on. But they had some negs in there, and Trinity was unfazed, and they capitalized on those mistakes. And then it came down to the last question. And it was a other science toss up, and they got it. Like they were not phased by the situation. So it's a real shame that we didn't get to see Trinity at Nationals this year, but this is the first top 10 finish for their program, and I hope that they will have more in the future and keep up with it because they're all seniors this year, so they're going to have to rebuild, but I hope to see them back here again soon.
Yeah, I mean, coming into this year, I was not at the KSI event last year, so I did not get to see them. But upon seeing the stats from that, and word filtering down that they were all going to be returning, I think this year we had pretty high expectations. I think they certainly met them, if not even exceeded them. Again, Ben mentioned the fourth place finish at Henderson, which again is one of those tournaments with a really stacked Southeastern PA field, and I saw them a couple of times when I was reading at the Palks tournament, and again, they have a great 1-2 punch. Stats wise, they get a lot more powers than some of the other teams we've talked about so far. Points per bonus, definitely a cut above, say, Hempfield. They're doing 21.5 points per bonus on IS sets, which is very, very good, and only a slight step or two below some of the teams we're going to talk about next. So it's certainly really unfortunate that they weren't going to have a round 2 at HSNCT, because I think they definitely could have bettered their 5-5 finish from last year.
All right. Now I'm actually going to remove a big stack of Civil War books here, staying on brand for me. And again, I'm sorry the green marker isn't coming out as well as I hope, but I hope you can see that 7th place right here with 47 votes was Friends Select out of the city of Philadelphia. I will actually go first this time, if that's okay. Friends Select, I think, is a team that came on later in the year. Again, another one. Again, I know it hurts everybody, but HSNCT, I really would have liked to see, or even SSNCT for them. Matt D'Annunzio was their top player. I believe he made second team All-State, but there was also a good core around him, Jonah, Silas, and Akhilesh, all capable of getting pretty strong buzzes. It seemed like they had a little bit of I don't want to say hangover because that's not quite what I mean, but there was an adjustment period for them at the beginning of the year because they did shuffle their lineup a little bit since last year. They lost Rudyard, for example, who was one of the biggest X Factor players probably in PA Quizbowl history. They were a little bit behind the top 6 or behind the stack of books at the beginning of the season. When I saw them at Henderson, for example, I was like, okay, I could see it, but it's not quite coming out yet. It seemed, from what I heard though, it seemed like they were definitely putting in the work between that time in November and when we reached Philadelphia City Championships in March. And I believe Ben or Alex can talk more about that, but they had a really impressive statistical performance at that tournament as well as winning it. So very strong, solid team with the lead scorer and 3 other solid players around a model, and wish we could have seen a little bit more of them as well.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of Friends Select. Not quite as strong as the last couple of years for them, but still a very potent program. And it did seem like they needed a little time to adjust to not having Rudyard in the team and figuring out exactly what to do to replace his chair. And so the fall was a little disappointing. And I think that's the only reason why they kind of fell behind a little bit. They were 7th in the midseason, so they stayed the same. But that's kind of where why they dropped from, I think it was 2nd preseason. But then they came back up. And they had a really good spring. Again, you mentioned the Philadelphia City Championship. I was really impressed by how they were performing there. And that's a smaller tournament, only open to teams from the city. So the field is not as strong as some of the other tournaments in the state. Unfortunately, it ended up being our last tournament of the year because it was just right as coronavirus was starting to really ramp up. I think the NCAA tournament was canceled about 2 days after it. And then, but yeah, they just can handle questions at the A set level and IS set level really well. Good power numbers from this team. And Matt was the core, but the others all scored, particularly Akhilesh. He didn't play Quizbowl most of his time. He's a senior now, and he only really kind of got going this year. But, man, some of those buzzes from Akhilesh were extremely impressive. And every time I watched him play, it was one of those players that it's just a joy to watch them go because they have some weird, kooky buzzes and cross categories and on them, kind of mixed academic stuff. And that was a pleasure. So, yeah, they're another team, but well, all these teams, it's a shame they didn't get nationals, but Friends Select another team that's solid.
Yeah, I think for French Lex, we had recognized Matt was going to be a power player. Just from the stats he was putting up, even next to Roger at the end of last year, and it was clear that their success was going to ride on him. But then Ben mentioned Aklish, and I will as well, because some of the buzzes he got, but not only that, just the bonus work. When I'm reading for them, he's the one who was pulling the bonus parts that no one else on the team knew. He was the reason why they could get 20, 30, 40 extra points a match just from what he knew. And just having that kind of player around is really helpful. And as far as their team performances were, again, the seventh place finish early on was not great, but they had fifth at Mannheim, which was again a very good field, and the city champs performance was fantastic. I think for them, A set level, they were almost as good as really any of these other teams. They're just again maybe a step behind on the IS set and up, which is why they're not in the top six. And I think head to head, they could pretty much take care of everyone below them, but didn't quite have the wins. I think they had a win against Penn Manor, but other than that, mostly lost to the teams that are ranked ahead of them, which shows that they're not quite there, but they were almost there.
All right, so we finished column A. Now how about a little of column B? So we're going to start removing the books. Again, sorry, this is not the most elegant format, but it's what I thought of. And say goodbye to the first volume of the Civil War official records, and hello to State College, our number 6 team with 61 votes in the poll. So State College is a bit of an interesting one, as we'll talk about. I didn't actually get to see them play just because we had so few data points on them, which is something interesting. So yet again, sorry for the refrain, but this is a team that probably lost pretty big by not having nationals to show us how they stacked up, not only on the state level, but also on the nationals level, as well as having KSI. Albert is very, very good, as we all know, a first-team All-State player, and they are actually losing him after this year as he graduates a year early to head on to Columbia. So they'll have to figure that out, but it's still a deep program with very good players all over the place, and some pretty strong results when they did manage to venture out and play a couple tournaments.
Yeah, State College is a team I have a struggle with, which is that they performed wonderfully whenever they showed up with their lineup that is their best players, but they just don't play that much. When they do, it was often on A sets, and when they do, it's with an ever-changing lineup all the time. They're famous for naming their teams based on kind of groups of friends that play together and never changing those lineups. That changed this year because those lineups changed a lot, actually, as players were absent. But it was never clear what was the actual. Well, it was clear the best team was the team that Albert was on, but sometimes that was A, sometimes that was B, and you just never knew. And so I kind of struggled to accurately place them among the rest of the state just because they seemed so fluid in that respect. That being said, the talent is clearly there with State College, as it always is. Monster powers from multiple players. A lot of them, I think, next to Albert, kind of get forgotten, but there are a lot of really good players. Allen, good buzzes all around from him. He did extremely well at the Penn State Spring Tournament this year. Jupiter is an excellent science player when playing outside of Albert's shadow. He put up tense numbers in a tournament in New Jersey. Chris, great literature specialist. So it's just, I don't know what their ceiling was because it was so fluid, but it was probably quite high.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see them. They didn't play that much. Although, unfortunately, I would have assumed that they and I would have been at KSI. But I think, Albert's numbers are just the numbers, especially like on the A sets that he puts up, are phenomenal. Like there's really great numbers, and then there's what he was putting up, and that clearly shows that even with it's an A set, doesn't matter. Like when your numbers are that good, and the PPBs are that high, and there's so many powers, you belong in that ranking. But I also think that the lack of playing is what prevented them from being in the top 5. because they couldn't really go out and make that statement, have those statement wins, put up those performances that would say, okay, they belong all the way up in the top 5.
All right. Speaking of number 5, we're going to go. It was very close for that number 5 spot. And actually, pulling away the official records kind of reveals number 4 too, but that's okay. We'll get to them in a moment. Henderson finished with 63 points, just ahead of State College's 61. Since I'm sitting here with 2 Henderson alums, I'm going to let them talk first this time.
So if Trinity was the program I think suffered in the long term most by losing the back half of the season, well, not back third of the season, I guess. Henderson was the one that lost the most in the short term because they had a spring to forget insofar as they only were together one time with their full lineup, full strength. And that was at Great Valley. And they had a very poor performance. Like there's really just no way around that. With the loss to Oxford, a loss to Hempfield, just kind of poor stats all around and looked kind of unfocused. And they didn't get the chance to redeem themselves at KSI, at Nationals, et cetera, which I think they probably would have. They've always been a team that's much stronger at NEQT than they are at the MACF format, and this year was no different. But based on what we saw in the fall, I think this is a good place for them in this poll, considering everything in that one tournament at Great Valley later on. In the fall, they performed really well. They came back from disadvantaged at the Philadelphia Fall Tournament to beat Manheim Township on an A set, and that was a really clutch pair of wins. To do that once is good, but to do it twice is significant. Bonus conversions up there, etc. VJ was their highest score. He caps off a very strong career. He came in, he won JV Player of the Year as a freshman 3 years ago and has consistently been one of the better players in the state. First team this year, first team last year. I think Henderson, they couldn't repeat their success of last year where they finished second in this poll, but had they had the rest of the season, I really think they would have recovered and they would have shown that Great Valley was anomalous, not the end of them.
Right. I think Henderson had some of the best statistical performances of this year. Again, most of that's in the fall, and that's kind of how this poll works. It is sort of a year-end wrap-up, but it's also sort of a snapshot in time, kind of a mixture of both. And that's one of the reasons why they've slipped down this far. I think they have the single best A set PPV out of any NEPA team this year. IS set, only Manheim Township has posted better PPVs. The Philly Fall Tournament was really, really intense because that was one of those big singular playoff bracket events where you're just running the gauntlet, and they came out of it, won the first game, disadvantage final, and then won the second game as well to win. I think the GV tournament got a lot of negative attention for them because, again, the loss to Oxford, losing to Hempfield, again, two teams that are much lower than them in the poll. But overall, even at that tournament, I think, stat wise, they were still one of the better teams there, one of the better teams in the playoff bracket. A lot of lineup tinkering this year. It was VJ and Vikram, but beyond that, it was just a whole rotating cast of characters. And I don't think they really ever, had anything set in stone. And if that had happened, had we not lost the rest of the year, I think, as Ben alluded to earlier, we might have seen a little bit more consistency or even a little bit higher level performance. But as it was, they did pretty well, and they beat a lot of the good teams. They beat Great Valley A. Manheim Township's only lost 3 times in state all year. They have 2 of those wins, so they certainly could play around with anyone. It's just they also were taking losses that some of the other teams above them maybe they wouldn't have taken.
Yeah, I think you guys kind of alluded to this already, but I think HSNCT would have been big for them because Henderson's one of the best NAQT category teams I think we've ever had in the state over the GPQB run. So
always been that way.
Yeah. And also, in case you couldn't tell, Alex has been officially deputized as our Bill James as the sabermetrics man for the state, coming clutch with the stats. All right, so moving on to number 4, who's already kind of been revealed because the official records are very thick. Penn Manor. 73 votes. Again, it's Connor Mayers is their heart and soul, very similar in many ways to when I used to be a high schooler. You got your top player and you've got your people chipping in around him where they can. Connor is super good, first team All-State yet again, very deep in literature, very deep in some other specialty areas, played a lot of college tournaments that helped him with that. Capable of beating anybody, capable of losing to a lot of people too, because of, as we kind of mentioned earlier, a high neg team at times. But I did not get to see this, but Ben and Alex did, so I'll let them talk about it a little more. But they made a heck of a run to win the Manheim Township tournament for their first tournament victory back in the fall. So I've said my piece. If you guys would like to talk about Penn Manor a little bit.
Yeah, and then now we can look back as he's graduating as a senior on Connor's career in Penn Manor as a phenomenon in the state the last few years. And the way I'm going to remember them is kind of basically a light version of the Lehigh Valley team with Alex Schmidt all those years. And it's just that, with all due respect to Connor, he's not as good as Alex Schmidt was. Alex Schmidt's, arguably, I think I would argue, a top 10 high school Quizbowl player ever. Certainly the best from Pennsylvania. That's not to say, Connor, as you mentioned, excellent, good specialist literature, history, able to cover things. He just didn't have that backup support. And that put a ceiling on where Penn Manor could go. That being said, unlike, say, college with the fluidity, unlike Henderson with the bad losses, there's no case against Penn Manor this year. Like, they are a really solid team and more consistent than they have been in the past, actually. I feel like they were very inconsistent the last couple of years. I think they finally found their rhythm this year and went through it. I didn't actually get to see them at the Manheim Township tournament where they claimed that win. But I hear by all accounts it was very impressive. And I've seen many wins from Connor where he, came back from the clutch, down, etc. He's going to buzz a lot, so he's going to nag a lot, But, when you're a player like that, who is scoring 120, 30 points a game, in some cases even more, that's fine. It's an occupational hazard of being that kind of player is to nag a lot. So, this is their highest finish in the poll, and we'll see if they can survive into a post-Mayor's world, but I think this was the right place for Penn Manor this year, and I'm impressed with what they've done.
Yeah, I was at the Manheim Township tournament and read a few of those playoff games. I mean, Penn Manor came out and like guns blazing, blitzed Henderson, blitzed. That's what I would say, like to win the tournament, and it was just an amazing performance. I mean, just powers, backed it up with the bonus conversion as you need to do on the 8 sets. And I mean, it was just one of those performances, like I said, with the Henderson winning at French Select, where it's just like it's a statement performance. It's not just winning the tournament. It's you're making a true statement. I think they didn't quite get enough scoring outside of Connor, and that's why they weren't consistently. That's why we're not talking top 3 with them. Because they have a win against Henderson, they have a win against Great Valley, but they've also lost more games than they've won against those teams, and they've dropped some to your Hempfields and Trinities and such. But again, tournament win, one of the few teams in the state to actually get a tournament win this year, and given the strength of Manheim Township, that's pretty hard to do. But Connor's definitely, like, when we're looking at the entirety of a career. I remember when he came on as a sophomore and he was already getting them into playoff brackets, and you knew he was going to be one to watch, and I think he capped off his career pretty well. It's unfortunate that they couldn't have another go at HSNCT because they had a pretty nice run last year and maybe could have bettered it, probably could have bettered it this year.
Yeah, there's no reason to believe they couldn't have, because since Connor was 90% of their scoring, and he only kept learning. So,
yep. And now, I'm sorry, one last appearance of the green marker. Number 3 is Great Valley B, who received 85 poll votes, the highest a B team has ever finished in one of our polls by a long shot. I saw this team play a couple of times, but not a ton, so I will let you guys speak to GVB first if you would like.
I didn't actually vote this way, but there was a significant portion of the season I thought they were actually better than their A team. Again, like it was the case last year at the end of the season. They're just really good. I mean, I find myself struggling to latch on to something because they're all just kind of all around really good. There wasn't a category I thought they were particularly strong in. There wasn't, something they did. It's just like they were really. They had that kind of intangible factor. Like they played really smart. They supported each other. They worked together on bonuses. Anish and Nolan, both sophomores, core that team, scored in bunches. I mean, to have two B team members make our All-State mentions this year, two. Great Valley is the deepest team I've ever seen in this state. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think for Great Valley B, there was definitely, when you compare them to their A team, stats wise, pretty similar. I mean, I think there's some tournaments where the points for bonus was higher, but the power numbers were lower. So I mean, they were right up there. The only reason, the only nailed on reason I think you can say, oh, they're third and Great Valley A is second is because whenever they played their A team, they couldn't get it done. I mean, they were getting blasted by their A team against everybody else. They could do whatever. I read for Great Valley B at PALS, and there was a game where Anish went off like I think eight powers, maybe like 10 total toss-ups, 10 gets or something like that, but 8 powers on an IS set, which I mean, is already impressive regardless, no matter what team it is. But when you consider that he's playing on a balanced team with other specialists, you just don't see those kinds of performances. And it shows you that, I mean, the B moniker is there, but they're not a B team. Like they are as good pretty much as any other A team in the state. Tournament finishes to match. Really, the thing with them is they couldn't beat Great Valley A and they couldn't beat Manheim Township. And that's why they're behind those two and those two only.
Yep, I saw GVB play at the Henderson tournament. Again, a lot of powers, a lot of knowledge. I think, they are definitely going to be below their A team just because of all those results. But again, another very strong team. And with a lot of Great Valley A's seniors graduating, they're going to be in a very high position, I would say. It's not controversial to note in the preseason rankings next year and maybe in the regular season ones too. Well, now that we've talked about GVB, why don't we talk about GVA, who finished in second place with 99 points. This was unanimous. We had 11 ballots, and every single one of them had Great Valley A as the second place team in the state. I actually didn't see them play, unluckily enough for me.
Really?
So, nope, didn't happen. So, again, I defer to you guys.
Same as Great Valley B, just slightly better. Like, there's only been 2 teams that had every member of the team, all 4 of them, named in the All-State mentions before in history. This is one of those teams. All 4 of them, John, Rishi, Anshu, and Noah, pretty much like clockwork. No matter what level sets you're playing, somewhere between 25 and 40 points per game. John tended to be the highest scorer of the bunch by some amount, but like clockwork, all 4 of them. And they have their specialties that they really perform on. John was the history guy. Anshu was the lit, arts, Rishi with the science, and then Noah kind of backed them all up kind of across the board. That's the perfect construction for a team. So lots of great buzzes, lots of great games from them. This is one of the 2 teams I felt was going in the top 50 nationally this year. I think this year was more broad in terms of like we could have had 12 or 13 HSNCT playoff teams this year than deep the way say the last couple years have been. So it's a different kind of success for the state. GVA seemed a little step above that because they just had no weaknesses, and the only reason they didn't finish first is because there was another team that was even better than them. But in couple years past, this team could have been the state champion.
Yeah, I think for GVA, again, much of what I say for the B team holds true, just slightly better. Although I will say, I think the GVB team maybe played a little bit more sensibly at times, or a little bit more cool or even keeled. I think the A team, for some of the matches I read to them, they're conceding a lot of points early in the first half of games because they're not quite focused, and they're good enough. They're going to beat these teams anyway, but it is one of the reasons why I think they are a little bit more prone to taking losses. They lost to their own C team, and I don't think we've mentioned Great Valley C, but Great Valley C was also in consideration for this poll and is certainly the best C team from this state that I've ever seen. And I saw them a bunch. But anyway, outside of that, they didn't beat Henderson this year, but they got a win against Manheim Township, and it was an important win because it won them the Henderson tournament. And that shows that, yeah, they have that ceiling. And the stats were great. The stats were really, really good with the powers, especially again when you have specialists like they do. Your power counts are going to be super high, and I think sort of even going into this season, John was sort of the guy, coming up through the middle school ranks. We've seen him now for 6 years, and it was always sort of his team, but the other three have really, really rounded out and were, making it what it was.
I'll agree with you guys because honestly, like I said, I don't have any observations to counter with.
Yeah.
But that means I will get to talk first about our number one team that you could probably guess who it is as I remove the last swath of books. Manheim Township A, 110 points, unanimous number one team. One of the best teams I think we've ever seen in the state of Pennsylvania, and one of the best pure teams that we have seen. Will Stager won Player of the Year. Very, very strong player and a good team leader from everything I saw. AZ got really, really good this year. Like Alex mentioned with John, he was a middle school player standout. I don't know if I want to say struggled last year, but didn't quite make a big mark last year. That ended very quickly this year. AZ and Will were scoring pretty much right in the same range as each other from the get-go. Sonia was a great third chair, I believe mostly a science player, but could get some pockets elsewhere. And Cyril, another one of those X Factory players as your fourth, where he can just get buzzes that you're like, okay, you got that. So strong team all around, good on toss-ups, good on bonuses working together. They got they can't win tournaments monkey off their back after some awkwardness in the fall. They beat Clark out of a very strong team from Nevada at the Great Valley tournament. They beat Detroit Catholic Central, one of the national powerhouses, in a match at Alderdice's tournament. And I think this team could have gone really, really far in the HSNCT playoffs. And I know we are all very sad that that couldn't happen.
Yeah, you can take your Groger ranks, which had him 26 strong, but not, you can take all the other metrics, whatever. This team was going to finish in the top 10 at HSNCT. I really believe that. Because in addition to being good, they just kind of had that team magic. You could tell the way they played. They were having so much fun with each other. They're really good friends. And I think they would have made each other better. You know what I mean? If you took each of those four players and dropped them on other teams, they wouldn't be as good as they were because they had that dynamic. Awesome gameplay. Will is one of those players that, starts out decent and gets better and better. And just like over a 4-year career, you see the difference. And by the end there, he just was one of the best players you had in the state and one of the best team leaders you've ever had in the state. Just the leadership and, incorporating his teammates on bonuses, making them study, harder because he kind of task manages that, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely everything you would want from a captain, and absolutely deserved Player of the Year win. Like you said, AZ, outscored him on most MACF style tournaments in the spring. Will was the better player on NEQT, AZ on MACF, but both scoring 70, 80 points a game. That's a really hard combination to beat. Sonia and Cyril both chipped in quite a bit. It's not like they're going to be gone. Every match you're going to see them come in for a buzz, 2, maybe 3, in their categories and support that. So yeah, this was a top 10 team nationally in my heart, even if we didn't get the chance to see that play out.
Yeah, I think from start to finish, Mannheim showed that they were, a cut above everyone else. Stats wise, even from the beginning of the year at Princeton, they finished highest out of the Pennsylvania teams that attended. Got a early, very close, but an early win over Henderson there. Philly Fall, best stats of anyone at the tournament. Looked like they were going to run the table. Lost 2 games to Henderson there. Didn't get that tournament victory. Best stats at the Henderson Invitational. Ran right through the playoff bracket. Lost to Great Valley. So at that point, the storyline, okay, this team's putting up the best stats, but they can't quite seal it at the end. And that changed. Once spring came around, they, I think, had just gotten so good to the point where no one was touching them. I can't impress upon this enough. They lost, I think, 3 times all year to teams in Pennsylvania, which is, astounding given that there's so many top quality teams here now. And that's just such an amazing stat for me personally, that they could always get the job done. And I think even being in the Groger ranks, being 26 or whatever, I think that in and of itself is pretty impressive because some of their methodology, with the college tournaments and stuff, it can be quite hard to crack, the high echelons of those rankings, and the fact that they were able to do that just shows that they're good. They can hang with anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I heard a story about them, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm going to share it anyway. I heard talking about the team camaraderie and just having game sense. I heard a story that they went together to see the movie Cats, which everybody knew was going to be terrible because they looked at it and said, if we know NAQT, they're going to write a toss-up about this. Would it have shown up? I have no idea, to be honest. How could I? But it just shows you that they're going this extra mile that I don't know how much we've ever seen before. So I don't mean to gush too much, but this was a very, very good team and a very, very good year, even if it had to be abbreviated. So any final thoughts from you guys as I'm going to get my ugly face out of the way for a second and zoom in on the whiteboard?
Yeah, just this was an interesting year. I had a lot of fun reading these events. There were a lot of really memorable matches. Even some of the ones that aren't necessarily memorable for their high quality play, like the Great Valley AC calls game. Those of you that know. This, as I mentioned earlier, this year was about breadth for me more than depth. I don't think we had as many top 50 teams as we had last year in 2018, especially, but or teams that were that caliber and could have gotten there, I should say. But just in terms of all around the state, we had so many teams that were like 6-4 NCT, good or possible, could have made it there. That would have been a really interesting national season for Pennsylvania this year. And the class of 2020, look around at these, awesome players that we've seen grow and perform over these years. Will Stager, Connor Mayers, Vijay An, Albert Jang, he's junior, but he's leaving. Truman Jury at Alderdice. Matt D'Annunzio at Friends Select. The whole Trinity team. John and Noah at Great Valley are graduating. So many significant players, I think, are leaving us, and it's a shame that we're not going to get to see them play again, even if it's not nationals. I'm just sad I won't get to see these guys play again.
Yeah, one of the exciting things about being at tournaments, and especially that this was true, I would say, at least in the Southeast, up until Manheim Township just decided to be so much better than everyone else, is that you just didn't know who was going to win at any given tournament. And since I've left high school, that's not always been the case. I mean, there were times when either Lehigh Valley or Downingtown STEM was going to win the tournament, and that's just how it was. But this year, particularly in the fall, it's just that there's that extra layer of excitement when you don't know who's going to emerge victorious out of the playoff bracket, and that made sitting in the stats room or word filtering out over the Discord or whatever about who won that key match to get in the finals, super exciting, and I can only hope that is the case next year as well. As far as HSNCT, again, we've mentioned it time and time again. It's really a shame that these teams aren't going to get a chance to go. I think especially Great Valley, because they've had a few years of really, really disappointing Nats finishes. And I think this year, I mean, given how good Great Valley A and Great Valley B were, I mean, they could have not only broken that duck, but, really, really excelled.
On two
Henderson
fronts.
typically rounds out into form by that time, and they didn't get a chance to do that. Mannheim, again, had serious, serious aspirations of being one of the best teams in the country. And, they're all losing that opportunity. But I think for the players that are returning, next year is going to be a very good year, and there's a lot of potential still left.
I'm going to come back into the frame for the last wrap up. So thank you all for bearing with me through this, and me and us through this experiment. We're at home and we want to try something new. So try it, we shall. In the future, we might try this again, hopefully with me not tearing out my elbow laying on it for 45 minutes, but that's okay. I can say this was fun for me. I think it was fun for you guys too. And I hope it was fun for you all watching as well. Many congratulations to all the teams, not only number 1 and number 2, but everyone who received votes, everyone who got good wins throughout this year, and everybody who had fun playing our crazy game of Quizbowl. So for Ben and for Alex, I'm Ryan, and we're going to sign off now. And we hope you have a great summer. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll see you whenever Quizbowl starts back up again.